Crimea has for so long stood as the jewel in the crown of Vladimir Putin's campaign of aggression against Ukraine. It's the one Ukrainian territory he has managed to snatch up through illegal annexation. And it's the peninsula from which he thought Russia could do immense damage once he launched his full war against Ukraine. Immense damage is being done, but it's not by Russia. In the space of 2 weeks, Ukraine has rained hell on Crimea, taking out some of Russia's most vital military assets. Putin loses everything, and he's coming closer to losing Crimea itself. Putin will feel like he's seen a ghost. The reality is that he didn't see anything at all until that ghost struck. On December 5th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine's ghost unit hit a staggering 8 Russian targets in occupied Crimea during a 2-week blitz that demonstrated time and time again that Russia's Crimean air defenses can't do a thing to stop Ukraine's drones. Among the objects destroyed during the sustained assault were an aircraft, several radar systems, and logistics infrastructure that Russia uses to ship troops and equipment around the Crimean peninsula. The news of the strikes comes from Ukraine's military intelligence, or HUR, which took to Telegram to explain exactly what the ghosts had managed to pull off. The masters of the HUR special unit of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Ghosts, continue methodical demilitarization on the temporarily occupied peninsula, the HUR statement blared. Over the past 2 weeks, 8 accurate strikes on the military infrastructure of the occupiers have been carried out. 8 successful strikes in 2 weeks aren't just painful for Putin, it's humiliating. It shows him and the rest of Russia that the Russian stranglehold on Crimea is anything but. A peninsula that Russia was supposed to be able to control to the extent that its forces could use Crimea to send streams of troops and equipment into Ukraine has instead become a target. And this target isn't hard for Ukraine to hit anymore. Everything that Russia has in Crimea is now in range of Ukraine's drones and domestically developed missiles, and there's nothing Putin can do about it. As secretive as HUR often is, it wanted to give Putin no opportunity to lie his way out of this one. Russia may want to claim that Ukraine is telling a pack of lies, however the ghosts have done the work that HUR says they have, and they can prove it with footage shared in HUR's Telegram post. Lasting for a little over a minute, the video is set to music and repeatedly shows the views being captured by Ukraine's drones as they travel toward their targets. We see domes being hit, infrastructure with no defenses being approached by drones. Several times over, Ukraine's drones score direct hits against radar stations, aircraft, and several other targets. Sometimes we even see the aftermath, such as a second or two of footage of a shattered target moments after we'd seen Ukraine's drones score a direct hit. Russia might still try to claim that nothing happened. It might even try to trot out the old drone debris excuse if people don't believe that nothing happened. But this 1-minute video showcases how easy it seems to have become for Ukraine to hit targets in Crimea, and how minimal the Russian air defenses are. In none of the footage do we see bullets or missiles flying towards Ukraine's drones. Every time, there is a clear path en route to a direct hit. Speaking of hits, let's dig deeper into what the ghosts took out during their 2-week spree. It's an absolute laundry list of some of the most important equipment that Russia has stationed in Crimea. HUR shares the basic list in its Telegram post, stating that Ukraine managed to hit an Su-24 frontline bomber, along with an antenna in a radio-transparent dome. Russia also lost an Orion unmanned aerial vehicle, which appears to have been the shattered aircraft seen in HUR's video. A 39N6 Castor 2E2 radar station and 2 48YA6 K1 podlet radar stations also fell victim to Ukraine's drones. And to cap it all off, Ukraine even managed to take out a freight train that Russia might use to transport anything from equipment, people, fuel, or supplies around the Crimean peninsula. Every single one of these is a legitimate military target, and all have just been destroyed by Ukraine's drones. A few of these targets are a little more important than the others, especially when it comes to how their destruction might impact the war and the situation in the Ukrainian mainland itself. In its report on the Ghost's accomplishment, RBC Ukraine highlighted 3 of the assets that Russia lost. The Su-24 bomber may be the most important, at least in terms of Ukraine's attempts to reduce the aerial pressure that Russia places on its cities and soldiers. A Soviet-era aircraft, the Su-24 is used to conduct strikes from the air against ground and naval targets, hence its designation as a bomber. Ukraine barely has a navy to speak of, meaning Russia has been using its Su-24s to strike targets on the ground. RBC Ukraine says that the aircraft is capable of firing both missiles and bombs, and Ukraine would have been very happy to have taken both out of the equation with the destruction of this Su-24. On the missile front, Military Factory reports that Su-24s can fire a huge range of air-to-surface missiles, including Russia's Kh-23, Kh-28, Kh-25ML, Kh-58, Kh-59, and Kh-29. Some of these are anti-radiation missiles, but all have the potential to wreak havoc on Ukraine's infrastructure and cities. The Su-24 is also a nuclear-capable jet, the outlet says. Plus, it's large enough to carry and drop CAB 500 bombs, which brings us to the second thing that Ukraine will have been very happy to have taken out of the equation: glide bombs. For much of the latter half of the war, Russia has been converting its massive stockpiles of CAB dumb bombs into glide bombs using special kits. These kits extend wings that allow the bombs to literally glide several dozen miles to a target, guided by satellite navigation systems in the process. Russia has used these bombs in enormous numbers. Between October 5th and October 12th alone, Russia fired 1,400 of these types of bombs at Ukraine, along with 3,000 drones and 92 missiles, The Guardian reports. Forbes adds that Russia has moved glide bombs into mass production at a scale yet to be seen, and that it now plans to build 120,000 of these devastating weapons annually. Around 500 of those will be long-range variants capable of hitting targets up to 125 miles away, which would be perfect for a fighter jet based in Crimea to launch into Ukraine while flying over the Black Sea. Taking out a single Su-24 isn't going to stop these aerial assaults, of course. But every little bit helps Ukraine, especially in a territory like Crimea, where Russia will struggle to replace any of the assets that it loses quickly. A single Su-24 taken out today may mean a couple of dozen long-range strikes averted until Russia is able to replace that lost fighter jet, assuming it replaces it at all. Strikes like these are all about relieving pressure as much as possible, as Ukraine's death by 1,000 cuts approach continues to hamper the Russian attack. Moving from defending against Russia's strikes to future Ukrainian offense, RBC Ukraine also highlights the two radar systems that the Ghosts took out during their 2 weeks of destruction. The Podlet system we mentioned earlier is a radar system that Russia links up to its S-300V surface-to-air missile or SAM systems. The radar plays a fairly simple role as it detects and tracks incoming aerial targets. That data is transmitted to the S-300, which fires the missile at the targets. You can already guess why taking out a Podlet is a big win for Ukraine. Without this radar system, whatever S-300 air defenses were linked to the Podlet are now operating blind. They have no information about what Ukraine is sending into the portion of Crimean airspace where the Podlet was lost, which opens the door for Ukraine to launch yet more drones and missiles. Perhaps this is why we saw so little resistance against Ukraine's drones in HUR's video. If the Ghosts took out the Podlet first, and it's likely that they did, then whatever air defenses that Russia has stationed in Crimea would have been rendered useless. Then there's the Castor 2E2 radar station. It serves a similar function to the Podlet, though this one is a circular scan radar station that can detect, track, and even identify aerial targets. It even specializes in tracking targets flying at low altitudes, which sums up Ukraine's drones. Staying low to the ground makes it much harder for Russian air defenses to pick up Ukraine's drones, as explained in a December 2023 Russian report shared by Forbes. The report covered Russia's Tor air defense system, concluding, "The practical experience of experimental firing at small targets with Tor indicates the low efficiency of their destruction. The main reasons for this are the imperfection of the SAM warhead detonation control system, as well as large errors in target tracking and SAM guidance on small-sized UAVs." The likes of the Castor 2E2 are supposed to overcome these air defense weaknesses against drones. Indeed, RBC Ukraine says that this radar station can detect drones, cruise missiles, and even aircraft that are capable of blending into the terrain. The Castor 2E2 is extremely important to Russia, not least because the data that the system gathers can be transmitted to both ground-based air defense systems and to Russia's air force. That makes the radar useful for both offense and defense, which in turn makes it a more high-value target than the Podlet we mentioned earlier. When Ukraine destroyed a Podlet, it probably blinded at least one S-300. The destruction of a Castor 2E2 may have outright torn the eyes out of several of Russia's air defenses and aerial offense platforms. What we see here is twofold. First, Ukraine has once again launched a volley of successful strikes at Crimea, which weakens Putin's hold on the peninsula even further. We'll explore that topic in more depth later in the video. Second, Ukraine's Ghosts have also shown Russia that they can strike at any time, and there seems to be nothing that Russia can do about it. After all, the 2 weeks of strikes in Crimea carried out by the Ghosts are far from the first time that this elite HUR unit has hit Russia hard. There have been many other occasions. Back in August, RBC Ukraine reported that HUR had managed to destroy a 91N6E radar system in Crimea. That system is used by Russia's S-400 air defenses to locate and track targets, much like the other radars we've mentioned. And it went up in flames thanks to an attack later revealed to have been carried out by HUR's Ghosts unit. Another triumph of the invaders on the peninsula has gone blind. It seems that this is a fiasco. The demilitarization of the temporarily occupied Crimea continues, HUR declared after that strike. But the ghosts weren't done. They've been haunting Russia's forces in Crimea up to the day before the details of the unit's 2-week operation were shared. On December 4th, RBC Ukraine also reported on another ghostly strike, this time carried out against one of Russia's MiG-29 fighter jets. Like the Su-24 we discussed earlier, the MiG-29 can unleash an array of missiles, which makes it a very dangerous asset for Russia to have in Crimea. Those missiles can be unleashed from a long way behind the front lines to strike Ukraine's cities and infrastructure. HUR left no doubt about what it has achieved with the sharing of a video that saw its drones score a direct hit on the MiG-29, along with another target. This attack wasn't even included in the list of targets that the ghosts destroyed in their 2-week blitz. It looks like Russia has a spectral problem in Crimea, both in name and in Russia's seeming inability to see or hit any of the weapons the ghosts unleash. The ghosts, along with the rest of HUR and the many other Ukrainian units that have struck Crimea over the last few years, are engaging in what the Kyiv Post labels the systematic demilitarization of the Crimean peninsula. Aerial, logistical energy, and other military assets are all on the Crimean docket, which brings us back round to the first thing we mentioned seeing in Crimea a moment ago. Putin is losing his grip on Crimea. From the Ukrainian standpoint, this is precisely what the country and its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, have been trying to make happen ever since Ukraine gained the ability to conduct long-range strikes in Crimea. The peninsula has been a priority for Ukraine ever since Russia annexed it back in 2014, and as the BBC reports, Ukraine will never give up on it. Part of the reason for that is legal. Ukraine's constitution states that Ukraine's president isn't allowed to cede any of the country's sovereign territory. Zelensky pointed that out in 2025, stating, "There's nothing to talk about here. This is against our constitution," when the US President Donald Trump started floating around the idea of Ukraine ceding Crimea to Russia as part of a peace deal. Of course, constitutions can be changed. It's happened many times before. But Ukraine isn't willing, and many would argue that it shouldn't be, to hand over Crimea to Russia. In some ways, exploits like those recently carried out by HUR's Ghosts unit offers a reminder to Putin that Ukraine hasn't given up on Crimea. In fact, not only has Ukraine not given up on the annexed peninsula, but it's been working tirelessly to make Crimea as strategically irrelevant as possible in the wider context of the full Ukraine war. Ukraine can't counter-invade Crimea by land to retake the territory. The Atlantic Council pointed that out back in June 2023, noting that it would be militarily foolish for Ukraine to attempt a ground campaign, even when its counter-offensive at the time was ongoing. Ukraine's ground forces would be churned up in such an offensive, as the land bridge that connects Ukraine's mainland is so narrow that it would allow Russia to tear through the advancing Ukrainian forces using drones, artillery, airstrikes, and any number of other weapons. Instead, the Atlantic Council argued in 2023 Ukraine is smart enough to realize that the actual strategic value to Russia in Crimea is the peninsula's most important port, Sevastopol. Ukraine has the ability to render the strategic value of Crimea moot and make Russia's Black Sea Fleet pay a high price every time it attempts to leave the port of Sevastopol, the Council said, suggesting that Ukraine could use a combination of naval mines and Neptune missiles to hurt the Black Sea Fleet. Ukraine certainly hurt that fleet, but it added the drones into the equation. Fast forward almost 2.5 years and Ukraine has achieved its objective of rendering Sevastopol practically useless to Russia. In July 2025, RBC Ukraine reported that partisan groups operating inside Crimea had managed to take photographs demonstrating that a port that was supposed to give Russia a major advantage in Ukraine was practically empty of warships. All of this matters in the context of what Ukraine's Ghosts unit just pulled off, because it means that Ukraine has taken Crimea pretty much out of the fight from a strategic standpoint. It will continue to monitor the peninsula's ports, of course, and it will quickly make Russia regret any attempt to bring its warships back to Sevastopol. With that port now close to useless, Ukraine is able to focus more of its efforts on the next stage of retaking Crimea, destroying Russia's air defenses and aerial assets. That's what 2 weeks of the Ghosts unit's attacks achieved, and it's what Ukraine has been doing for months in Crimea. With each radar station taken out, a new aerial corridor opens up for the Ukrainian drones. Every fighter jet destroyed is an aircraft that can no longer launch missiles and bombs at the mainland. Little by little, Ukraine is whittling away at Putin's military inside Crimea, loosening the grip of Russia's leader in the process. And it's doing it all without having to sacrifice any Ukrainian soldiers in a ground assault. There won't be a counter-invasion into Crimea. Zelensky said that himself when responding to Trump's comments that Ukraine doesn't have the weapons that it needs to retake Crimea by force. In April, Ukraine's president said, "It's true what President Trump says. I agree with him that we do not currently have enough weapons. Weapons specifically, not people. Because our people are more important, the most important thing. But it's not true to say we do not have an army." If that's the case, then does that mean that Ukraine's Crimea campaign is for naught? Not at all. As Zelensky pointed out, Ukraine's goal is to weaken Putin's grip on Crimea. while stressing to the West that more diplomatic and economic pressure is needed to force that grip to open. This is the underappreciated aspect of Russia's control over Crimea. That control requires resources, both in terms of people and money. Russia has moved up to 800,000 additional Russians into Crimea since 2014, the Kyiv Independent reports. Even before the Ukraine war started, outlets like the Jamestown Foundation were pointing out that Russia was funneling billions of dollars into Crimea to support the peninsula's budget. In 2021 alone, Russia was set to spend $1.5 billion in Crimea, accounting for 68% of the region's budget, just to keep the peninsula financially afloat. Throw all of the military equipment that has been stationed and destroyed in Crimea, and you have a very hefty bill for Moscow. That's the point of what the ghosts have done. Every extra dollar that Russia has to spend on Crimea to reinforce the peninsula with new weapons and air defenses amounts to money that Putin can't spend on weapons for the Ukrainian mainland. And Putin can't just not send more weapons to Crimea. The 1.6 million Russians currently living there would feel abandoned, and they may decide that living in an increasingly active war zone isn't for them anymore. If those Russians leave, Putin has even less control over Crimea. So Ukraine is putting Putin into a catch-22 situation of spending more on Crimea or risk losing the influx of people that he uses as leverage to stake his claim over the peninsula. Either way, Ukraine wins. Putin's control slips. As for the ghosts, we imagine that it won't be long before we hear rumblings of them coming back to haunt Crimea again sooner rather than later. And it's not just Crimea where Putin's control and influence are slipping. Russia's president is stretching himself too thin, especially in Moldova. Now he's in the process of losing Transnistria, as his isolated soldiers in that region can't stand in the way of Western reforms in Moldova. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes against Russian-occupied Crimea. And thank you as always for watching.